对吧？
点心局好像是昨天还是前天刚开的大悦城的，可好吃。
反正网讯要交那个作业交了，因为30
开始聊吃的呀。
Hi guys, please turn off your microphone. 请大家请观众们把这个麦克风关掉，谢谢。
That they must be able to in order to carry through the GEC column. The column.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
大家能听到我说话吗？ Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to our Zoom conference tonight. And firstly, I would like to thank Peace Lab for organizing this and coordinating this event. And thank you, our three speakers. I'm gonna introduce today's speakers. The first one is Sun Qian, who is an international news reporter who is she's now based in Berlin, and she went to the Polish and Ukrainian border twice in March, and she covered some news from there. And so she saw and knew some situation about the humanitarian. He saw some humanitarian situation and how people got supported by surrounding countries. And the next speaker is Lydia. If you have attended our last event, she was there as well. Lydia is a fellow Schwarzman scholar at Tsinghua University, and now she works in Beijing. And today she will introduce the humanitarian situation back in her hometown, and she will also talk about some female issues, the feminism issues as well. And then after Qian and Lydia, we have Katrina Primak. She's a Ukrainian now based in Kiev, and which is the capital of Ukraine. She's a women rights activist, and she used to work in the contemporary art section. Today we're going to discuss a few specific topics, which mainly focus on the situation of women in the war and how people get assistance and humanitarian aid. If you guys have followed the news and the updates of the Russian and Ukraine conflicts, you might know that since the war began, a huge number of refugees have fled Ukraine since the war began in February 24th. And recently, although the flow has slowed down markedly, but we have seen more than 3.8 million people fled the country. And the main point is that around 90% of the refugees are women and children. So we will have Sun Qian to talk about this topic. Hi, Sun Qian.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. So you've been to could you please just briefly introduce yourself before we start your speech?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sun Qian. So English friends call me Qian. And I'm a freelancer journalist who works in Berlin for different media outlets. Some are Chinese and some are German. And my main focus is European politics and a bit more focused on German politics, but obviously when it's a pan-European issues that Germany has a strong involvement, I'm also part of it. Yes, as Chengjing has introduced, that I've been to the Ukraine and Polish border twice in March. And I'm happy to be here today and share my experience with you guys. And if you have any questions, obviously, feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you, Qian. Before we start, I forgot to mention that today we have an interpreter with us. Thank you very much, Meredith, for your support and help. So if you need interpreting, please use 传译。今天我们是有一个同声传译的功能，也有一位志愿者在帮我们做翻译。谢谢 Meredith， 谢谢你的翻译。如果有需要同声传译的同学，可以在这个 Zoom 的右下角看到这个地球仪下面的传译功能，然后打开中文这个频道。不要选择那个原始音频，也不选英文，就选中文这个频道，然后你就可以听到 Meredith 的翻译了。如果还有问题的话，可以在对话框里面留言，然后我们的志愿者会帮你解答。OK。首先，so recently you've been to the Polish and Ukrainian border. So when did you go there?
So the first time was the beginning of March, so almost about several days, I think 4 or 5 days after the conflict started. And then I stayed there for an entire week, then I come back. And the second time is about a week ago, so the third week of March. So the first one is when the intense amount of refugees are going through the border, and the second time is when the action is a bit already slowed down a bit.
All right. So what did you mainly cover?
So what I mainly covered are maybe 3 aspects. So the first aspect is the German reaction to the war. So what are the people in Germany reacted to the Russian aggression of Ukraine, and from different aspects, from, for example, citizens in Germany to high-level decision makers, how the German government reacts to the conflict. So that's one aspect. And the second one is how the Polish reaction to it, also same from the government level to the citizen level. And the third one is obviously the refugee crisis. So this has been the biggest and most rapidly growing refugee crisis since the Second World War, and has quite a big impact on all the bordering countries, and which Poland as one of the biggest one.
Right. So during your 2 trips to the border, can you tell us more about what did you see there? How many refugees crossed the borders, and how was the situation at those border crossings?
Maybe I'll focus a bit more on my first trip, because the first trip I went to a small city called Przemyśl, which is very difficult to pronounce. They were all making fun that there was a very small border city where normally nobody would go there in Poland. But now, because of the refugee influx, you have all kind of journalists there, and everybody's trying to pronounce this name properly. It's very close to one of the biggest crossing point between Ukraine and Poland, which is called a Medica. So that's the biggest one. There are altogether from north to south 8 cross points between Ukraine and Poland, and that one is the biggest one. So because we were there for several days, so the first days we went there, you already see it's kind of still a bit chaotic. Was a lot of people coming through the border. So if you stand there, we didn't really count, but you just see a streams of people keep coming in. And that lasted for 24 hours. So that shows the amount of refugees crossing. So there are, I think, 30,000 people crossing that border, specifically one at the highest peak. So the first day I went there, there are already all the necessary support system there. For example, there are medical staff, there are all the donated goods, including clothes, food, daycare product, hygiene product, even pet food. But then in the few days, every day we went there, you see the growth of people coming in, and also you see the scaling up of the border. So it looks like a small city at some point, and for example, if you come out, like imagine yourself as a refugee coming out of the Ukrainian-Polish border, the first thing you see when you cross the border is volunteers having warm food, having clothes, having hot drink, offering desserts to kids, offering any kind of assistance. And at the last day before we leave, was kind of a very heartwarming moment because that was one of a very sunny day. And there's a German pianist. So he lives 15 hours drive from the border, and he drove his piano to the border, and he just played the piano the whole day there. And the whole thing looks like a music video where you have a music playing at the background, you have people coming in, and you have everybody helping everybody. So I think one thing may be a bit different than what we always see at the border is obviously people are very miserable. They're leaving their loved one behind. They're leaving their home behind. They're leaving the country they grow up in, and they never know when they can go back. So most of the things we see is probably people are miserable and frustrated and sad. But actually, the moment they cross the border, you see a lot of smiles on their face, because first they know they're safe, and second is they were really greeted with welcome, with kindness. So I think it comforts them after such a long travel. So I think there are definitely a lot of heartbreaking moments, but there are also a lot of heartwarming moments.
I see. It sounds very comforting when people cross the whole country to the border, and then they are greeted by volunteers. So I wonder how these groups of refugees made up. I've heard that most of the refugees were women and children. I think more than 90%, because the male were prohibited from going out, leaving Ukraine, except for a few categories of people.
It's very obvious wherever you go. So, for example, even in German Berlin main train station, at the train station in Poland, where most of the refugees come, and also at the border, I think the first day you still see one or two male, but then afterwards you only see women with children and pets. And the only male you'll see is, I saw it because, in Ukraine, people like men from 18 to 60 are not allowed to leave the country. So I thought maybe I would see some older men, but if I recall, I didn't see any. So then I talked to some of them, and they're saying, if they're older, first, it's difficult to move around, and second, they don't want to leave. They don't want to leave anymore, even they are allowed to. And also another thing is you also see a few handicapped people, because I think they're also released from this obligation to have to fight in the war, so they can also flee. So when you're there, it's kind of surreal feeling. You just see the stream of people coming, and they're entirely consist of a female and children.
The refugees are female and children. So what are the most challenging part for the new life for these people? So
so I had a bit of a long conversation with several of them. I think quite a few of them are still very shocked about the situation. So they're still in this strong disbelief that this actually happened, and their life just turned upside down one day after the other. And so they're still processing. So they didn't even think about, okay, what am I going to do for the next few months, or what can I do for me and for my family in the next few months. A lot of them also still have very strong hope that they can go back to their home country. So they think this is a temporary kind of accommodation. They're not looking for a long-term plan yet. And some of them, the ones I talked to, some of them have means. For example, they actually speak English. For example, they actually have friends in other European countries. So obviously for them, it is easier. They can already make some plans. But I would say majority of people still first processing the emotions and reality, and second is still having hope that they can go back to their normal life.
Right, I see. So are they staying in Poland or they are going further west?
A lot of people are staying in Poland, majority of them, because first it's easier in terms of language. And it's definitely not the same language, but I think for Ukrainians, it's easier to learn Polish than, for example, German or Swedish. And the second is because it's so close. So as soon as the war is over, and they can then make their move back home. So a lot of them are staying there. And sorry, you were asking me that because of their majority women and children, so what are something that's especially difficult for them? I'm not sure if it is politically correct to actually state this, but it's not actually a bad thing in terms that status they're refugees as their children or women, because it's much easier for people to accept them. You know? So a lot of people in Germany and Poland, they open their home, like their private home, to host refugees. And I think it makes most people feel it's easier to accept women and children. And that's not to discount the fact that women fleeing country, taking care of their children alone, leaving their husband behind is difficult. No way, not to sugarcoat the situation, but I guess maybe a little bit of silver lining is people are really willing to help because for the fact that they're children and women.
So you mentioned that there are many volunteers waiting at the border to greet and help them and to support these refugees. So where these volunteers come from, and how they are helping in details? Can you please explain more?
Obviously, there's a lot of Polish volunteers because they're close at their country. And otherwise, in every kind of border, in every border point, in all the train stations, accommodation of refugees, there are volunteers from all over Europe, really all over Europe. You can hear all different types of languages speaking. And some of them heard that the war is going on, and the next thing they do is they book the ticket and go to the border to help. Before they come, some of them don't even know what they can do. They just want to be there. And then some of them, for example, sign up at the train station because there are a lot of organization to do to accommodate the refugees. So that's, I think, one type. They just had a strong urge, they have to do something. They just went to the border. And there are others are a bit more organized. So some of them bring donated goods to Ukraine. So they will drive from wherever they are and buy the stuff and then drive to the border and then give it to the border, and then someone will bring it into Ukraine. And some of them organize buses and their private cars to come to the border to pick up people. I think the Polish government did a relatively good job in transporting people from the border to different parts of Poland and different parts of Europe. But obviously, the more the better. So a lot of people just go there and have their private cars, and sometimes they just have a flag and says, okay, like a German flag, for example, that means they can take people to Germany, or they will hold a sign and says, okay, I can host 2 family or 3 family or 1 family, so they can directly pick up people from there. And obviously medical volunteers. And I also met this guy from North Island, and I think he didn't really travel much outside his own country. He's a farmer. We met him in front of a train station, and he was holding 2 bags of chocolate. And he says, okay, I got a couple of €100 from all my friends, and they sent me here and they said, okay, we just want to put a smile on children's face. That's why we're giving everyone chocolate. And you do see some people almost from every aspect of help that they could offer, coming from every part of Europe.
That's very heartwarming to hear. So what about in Germany, in Berlin, and how do people around you in Berlin react to the war in Ukraine?
I think Berlin is one of the country that's, well, Berlin is in one of the country that actually felt quite close to the war. It has, Germany as a country has its own baggages in terms of war. And specifically, Berlin itself is a very left-wing city. It was very anti-war. I guess it's a bit the same as somewhere else, that when first it happened, nobody believed it's true. And it became the main topic, or for a few weeks or for 2-3 weeks, the only topic that people can talk about in any kind of social situation. And people check on news all the time, following up the updates, cannot focus on work. That's the only thing people talk about. I think 1 or 2 weeks after it happened, there was a very big demonstration. Berlin has a bit less than 4 million people. And on that specific anti-war demonstration, I think 1/6 of the population was on the streets. That's about, let's say, 500,000 of people was on the streets that day protesting. So you see kilometers and kilometers of only people holding signs and demonstrating, which is quite impressive to see. And then also the mobilization of help is also quite fast. I think some people maybe see this very heartwarming video at the main train station where crowds of people holding signs and says, we can take refugees. That's from the Berlin main train station. I think right now, the situation has calmed down a bit. A lot of people are also quite stressed, because I think halfway through March, when Putin threatened, they are not dismissing the idea of using nuclears. And Berlin was thought of as one of the target city that if Putin would shoot any bombs outside of Ukraine, then Berlin will be one of the main targets. And you do see people who are not from Germany, and for example, you're from Italy or Portugal, and they're saying, okay, well, we have to go. So they're actually organizing to leave Berlin permanently because they really feel the threat that's so close.
I see. So can you see refugees from Ukraine in the city when you are in Berlin?
I think if you are walking on the streets, not much. But if you go to a main transportation point, like the main train station, which is people go through there every day almost. If you commute, it's a very central connection point. You do see a lot of refugees and people who are helping. And the main part of the main train station changes look completely because of the incoming refugees. And but sometimes maybe it is my personal perception, and sometimes there are people walking in the streets, and it's a woman and have a kid, and obviously not speaking German. And I think, okay, they must be refugees. So I have this impression in my head.
Sure. And since the war began, and with the flow of refugees out of Ukraine and into Europe, we have seen people comparing the refugee acceptance policy towards Ukrainians and Syrians and other refugees from the Middle East. So based on your perspective, so what are the differences in real context, and how do you and people around you in Berlin to comment on this?
I think it is a very sad truth. Then, even though it's heartwarming to see other people wanting to help the refugees from Ukraine, but it just a slap in the face for a lot of people that how strong racism that still exists in Europe and in Germany, even in Berlin, a city where racism is almost not tolerated. It has zero tolerance. You see, for example, different kind of TV stations says there is a war, and this happens not only far away from us, but actually happen in Europe. Like these comments are very, the comment alone is already a very strong statement that they think that Europe is a different place than Africa, for example. So I remember in 2015 to 17, we also followed the refugee crisis very closely. So we interviewed many Syrian refugees back then. And they all had a very hard time, even they come to Germany, that even the border was open to them. But once they arrive in Europe, they have to go through a very long bureaucratic system to be registered and to even start working. And there is a special regulation in Germany where if you come as a refugee from Syria back then, you have to wait for at least 1 year. And there is a sort of this period that you just have to let everything settled. So they cannot work for 1 year. They receive this minimum support from the government, and but they can't do anything. A lot of them are well-trained engineers and computer scientists and so on, but they cannot work because they're holding the status of a refugee. And for the Ukrainians, almost I think 2 weeks into the conflict, and they already had a special agreement Europe-wide, not only just Germany, Europe-wide, that they can prolong their visa unlimited, and they can start working right away in European countries. Compared to what the Syrians have received, it's a very, very big difference. And obviously the sentiment of the people as well. I think I almost never heard anyone like against helping refugees from Ukraine. But back then the chancellor was still Merkel. And when Merkel says, we welcome all the refugees, and there's a strong wave against that. And you can talk to even some of my friends would say, we're against that. And here, I think this time, I never heard anything of anybody that's against the refugee. So obviously people of color, so people of minorities are already noticing it from the first day on. That's the difference, how they react to different group of refugees. In Germany, their own people, their own citizens are also reflecting on the situation. But obviously the reflection didn't change anything. They didn't change the situation for the Syrian refugees. And there are still refugees from several years ago not having a proper treatment.
This is a sad truth, and we hope the reflection could change something in the future. But it's not to say that people should not welcome Ukrainian refugees, but how we can react to how can we treat people equally in terms of this kind of crisis or the tragedy. So what other side effects have you seen since the war began?
I think the most prominent one is definitely the price of petrol and diesel. It went up almost, the price doubled just 1 month into the war. It was already quite high, and now it became a historical price. So it definitely has influence on private household who drives cars and factories and so on. So the whole, how much Europe depends on Russia for energy supply is one of the biggest topic at the moment in Germany and in other European countries as well. And another one is the inflation. So the inflation was already starting to surge because of the pandemic, but actually in Germany right now, the side effect of the pandemic is also almost wearing down because all the restrictions has been lifted and all the business are back to work. So people actually had a quite promising projections of this year's economic growth. So people think it's going to be 4 or 5%, which is not bad. But because of the war, all the major economic institutions has to downgrade this projection as well. So now it's about 2%. So that's the economic growth. And also inflation, it's almost as high as 1981. So the last time it was this high was almost 40 years ago. And also you see the 1981.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So almost,
sorry.
No worries. Almost 40 years ago. So in this 40 years, it was never this high. And you see so inflations are not just numbers for economists, but also you can definitely see everything's becoming more expensive, especially fresh vegetables. They're twice as expensive as before. Also dairy product. And also if you go to supermarket, some of the agriculture products that are coming from Russia and Ukraine, sometimes you can't even buy them anymore, like sunflower seed oil, flour, and some of the supermarkets, actually, most of them the shelves are just empty. You can't get them anymore. And also just the fear in general, people are reluctant to buy stuff and people are saving up a bit more. So this fear of uncertainty, as the experts put it is as strong as 2009 after the financial crisis. So in that sense, Europe is also in a quite tricky situation right now in terms of economics.
I see. And thank you, Qian, for your sharing. And I forgot to mention this to our dearest audience, is that because Qian is going to leave early in today's conference. So after her speech, we're going to leave 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A session. And if you have questions, you can leave in the dialogue, and then we will ask Qian. I think there are very few questions in the conversation. So before we start the Q&A session for yourself, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I think your question is very thorough, covered almost everything that.
Okay. So 我看到有there is one question: is there any specific assistance and help that these refugees need? Or I think she's asking that, is there any specific assistance and help that these refugees need and we can provide?
From the Chinese-speaking region?
Right, I see. Yes, I think so.
Yeah, to be honest, I think something very concrete that we can do from the Chinese-speaking region is very limited, because what we can do is obviously for example, you can donate. That's always helps, right? And some of the organizations will use your money, I believe, wisely to help what the refugees are in need. And I think what we can do as people who live in China is really to think of, because what they need the most, let's say, is for the war to end. So that's the only thing will help them. I know some of you might also feel very powerless. There's this people losing their home, losing their life, then we can't do anything. That's a very frustrated feeling. And a lot of people also see the split of opinions in sort of Chinese-speaking internet. And also maybe you and your parents and friends have different opinions. And some people hold the opinion that we don't need to talk. especially to someone who has completely different spectrum of political opinions, that you shouldn't even engage into a discussion or conversation. I somehow hold a very different view. I think we should talk, especially the people you care, your very good friends, your family. It won't change their mind overnight. But I do believe that people who cares about you and you care about them, you have a certain level of connection. And if you can change one person's opinion about war and let them know how miserable the situation right now is for the people in Ukraine, and also for people in Russia, to be honest. And I think maybe that's something could help. If the entire Chinese population has a very different opinion towards the war, I think it will have an impact as well.
I see. And thank you for your answer. And then the next question is that, because you just mentioned about the increasing prices of oil and gas, does the increasing prices have impact on Europeans' attitudes towards the conflict?
I'm not very sure about this question. So if the, I think because Europeans are, or it's hard to generalize, obviously. Yeah, they're already very anti-war. So combined with the petrol and gas increase, they're definitely 200% more anti-war. What the surged price of gas and petrol maybe change something more is even that they really have to reconsider their relationship with Russia, and they just want to be independent from Russian energy supply as soon as possible. I think that's something changed drastically here in Europe. And also another thing changing Europe is a united Europe in a very ironic way.
Okay, and okay, thank you. And the next question is that how serious is the situation of family separation based on what you saw at the border?
So if I may, maybe I leave this question and the next one about Kiev to the next two speakers, because I think they will know this issue much better than me, because they're actually in Kiev, so they live among the Ukrainians.
Okay, because you can also see the questions in the conversation.
Yes,
you can pick one that you would like to answer.
Because I think they are definitely more qualified to answer these two questions than I do.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, maybe I can. Next one. So they says that. So they're asking if Chinese government gave Ukrainians aid in terms of milk powders and other humanitarian aid. No, not really. I can't really see it, because if they're through, for example, government aid channels, so they don't go through border, probably they have special transportations that are arranged to Ukraine. So in my reporting, I didn't really encounter that. And another kind of like at the border, unfortunately, I didn't see any Chinese organizations. I didn't see any. There are, like, for example, Doctors Without Borders and their soup kitchen and everything. Most of them are from European countries. I didn't encounter any. There are international organizations, maybe China is a member of, but there is no specific Chinese organizations at the border.
Okay, we have, so now we have one last question. You can pick one. This is hard to pick. Probably, shall we talk about, is there any specific help from local or international organization that help female refugees?
That's definitely yes. There are different organizations that specifically protecting women and protect female refugees. There are NGOs who are specifically helping them. But to be honest, in this situation, I don't see this aspect that strong, because all of the refugees are actually women. and which can create a problem are there specific needs that's not being met specifically because they're women and children. But luckily there are, like, for example, I know there are female journalists organizations are specifically helping the female journalists that are fleeing the country, and also facilitating the reporting in and out of Ukraine. There are used to be organizations that are focusing on domestic violence, which obviously it focus on more on women, and now they shift their focus a bit as well in facilitating that the female refugees coming to Europe and finding places to stay, so on.
Okay, that's all.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much, Tian, for your sharing today with us. So we have a very specific and panorama from the border that you have gave us a very good view of what's happening there and what the people are helping them. Okay, so thank you again for your participation.
Thank you as well for organizing it. I'll stay here. I love to hear the other two speakers to share their story as well.
Okay, thank you again. So let's move to Lydia. So Lydia is our guest from last session, from last event. So some of our audience could have seen her before. Lydia, could you please briefly introduce yourself before we start?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jing. Right, my name is Lydia Zhgir. I'm Ukrainian living in Beijing. I'm staying here for 3.5 years. I studied in Tsinghua University, Schwarzman College, and then stayed to work in education sector and gradually moved from education to sustainability education sector, concentrating on sustainable community development in China and working with Chinese students. So currently, as I'm still in China and the war is happening in my home country, I'm also doing media support, volunteering by providing information backup for Ukraine, so to say. In China, I'm coordinating a media center with a few hundred translators, Ukrainian Chinese translators, who are working on the official news channels and translating news from Ukrainian to Chinese, and then we're spreading them in the Chinese media. So thank you for inviting. It's my second call with you guys, and I'm thrilled to talk to you and share some insights I know. I'm actually extremely grateful to Tian for sharing the information about the Ukrainian refugees behind the Ukrainian border, and it's really heartwarming to hear how they are being accepted in Europe.
Can you please tell us more about what's happening in your hometown and how's the situation there?
Yeah, thank you for asking. My hometown is, I think my hometown is blessed. I'm from Cherkasy. It's the central part of the country. And thanks to our army, the Russian troops have never reached that far. And I hope and I keep my fingers crossed that they will never do. So Cherkasy is a relatively peaceful part of Ukraine, the entire central region, and it has become a sort of a transfer base for the internal migration of internally displaced people from the east and north to the west of the country. So the situation is under control, and I would even say that it's comparable to normal life of my hometown, besides that half of the population left. I think they left for the general worry of the war at the very beginning of the entire situation. In the end of February, many people left. I'm not sure if about the numbers, how many people from my hometown fled the country, but I know that a lot of people dispersed around the villages in the countryside of the country, because many people find countryside much safer than big cities. As the situation has been resolving, unfortunately, the big cities are the most affected by the war because of the shelling, bombing, airstrikes, which are happening quite often in Ukraine. But Cherkasy, particularly this city, it has never been bombarded like full scale. Only the military bases on the outskirts of the city have been bombarded. So many people returned to the city. Many businesses have already been reopened and started functioning again because the situation is stable thanks to our army and air defense systems.
And we know that your hometown has, because it's blessed and it's quite peaceful at this moment, so it's been transformed into a kind of a refugee acceptance center. So how is the situation there?
Right, so at some point, my city became like a second-tier refugee hub. To understand how it works, like Ukraine stretches from east to west and from north to south. Cherkasy sits in the middle, and sometimes to escape from the north and east, which are the most affected by the war, people need to cross the center somehow on the way to evacuation in the north. And northern region is also relatively, western region is relatively safe. But in the last 2 weeks, there have been an increasing number of airstrikes on the western cities, including Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Lutsk. So unfortunately, even the west of Ukraine is not like entirely safe anymore, which adds a lot of distress to the internally displaced people and adds motivation to them to flee to the European Union countries instead of staying within the western part of Ukraine. So Cherkasy was serving a kind of stay and leave hub, like a transportation hub. People would come there on their way to the west, stay for a day or two, resupply, rest, and go to the west. So there have been two different kinds of relocation in these terms. The first kind, people who have their own transportation and are evacuating from their hometowns by their own initiative, they would just get in the car and have a stop in cities like, for example, Cherkasy, Kropyvnytsky, or Poltava, and spend the night there, get food, clothes, depending under which circumstance they were fleeing from their home, and recharge the car, for example, and then travel further west. So it's also, the travel is complicated by additional dangers, like danger of airstrike. For instance, you cannot entirely plan your journey. If there is a missile flying through the sky, you definitely cannot really take full responsibility for your passengers and travel under this condition. So some people had delays in their travel plans and so on. And another kind of relocation is when there is centralized evacuation. So the government in coordination, I don't know how you can call it coordination, but the government has to have agreement with the occupants, with the invaders in those cities, that there would be a green corridor, the buses would come into the besieged city, pick up people and evacuate them into a safe place. So in this circumstance, there would be a number of buses, dozen of buses, and they would take out hundreds or thousands of people out of the city. So this is a more centralized evacuation, which has been the most challenged one, because there have been not many green corridors granted by the invaders. So majority of people who fled, they fled by themselves. If they did manage to arrange transportation for themselves. there are also volunteers who like risk their lives to just drive their car to the besieged city and pick up some people and evacuate. So those are extremely courageous and noble people who serve the needs of those people who are in danger. Yes, so my hometown became this transportation kind of stayover hub. And because green corridors have not been granted for a while, in the last weeks, there have been no centralized deliveries of refugees to there, but there have been waves of incoming people who individually evacuate from their hometowns. So the situation is, let's say the number of evacuees is declining now. Because majority of people who wanted to flee, they fled already. But it's also because the situation with the occupation has been more or less the same over a few weeks. So Russians did not occupy many new cities in the north and east of Ukraine. So people who stay in those close to the occupation zone territories, they stay there and hope that there will be no occupation. But those people whose cities got besieged, they are trying to get out as much as possible. This is why we are kind of encouraging people who are close to the zone of conflict to like evacuate before it is too late. However, Ukrainians are people who are prone to be very connected to their homes and land, mentally, emotionally, and they wait until it is very, very difficult to evacuate from there. We are kind of observing it in many directions, even in Kharkiv, which is extremely difficult city to stay right now, which is being bombarded every day, but people still, there are people who prefer to stay there than evacuate. So, yes.
Yeah, you just mentioned many volunteers are offering food and supply assistance to those refugees and displaced people. And I wonder who are the volunteers? Are they coming from international organizations or local volunteering group?
I would say in majority, they're just local people. There is, of course, some international organizations working there. Red Cross of Ukraine, like the Ukrainian Red Cross, is also doing a lot of work. But those are few numbers, and international organizations, they also usually need to pay attention to the life and security of their employees. So I personally know dozens of volunteers who are just using their own cars or buy a new car to deliver supplies to those cities and evacuate people on the way back. I'm good friends with the person who organized evacuation of like hundreds of people from Kharkiv, just by matching people who are seeking evacuation to the people who are fleeing. And he's physically in Beijing right now. So he's a Ukrainian who is in Beijing, but he's organizing the logistics for evacuation from Kharkiv. So just on people's enthusiasm, many things in Ukraine, like supplies, logistics, delivery of food and protection, they are working thanks to volunteers, because during the last 8 years, Ukrainian society has learned that we also need to back up our country, our government. Like we cannot completely wait in this difficult moments that the government will come and fix everything for us. We need to step in and do it. And this institution of social initiative of civil society, it's very strong right now. So people do not wait that someone comes and tells them what to do. They're just doing it. Even if it requires risking their health and life, they're still eager to do that to help other people in need.
I see. And then So I saw the news that the Ukrainian troops are retaking some cities, and with the retaking of these cities, I saw some articles saying that one testimony said that she had been raped by Russian soldiers, which I cannot confirm independently. So have you seen the news? So is it a real case?
I'm afraid it is a real case. It's been published in the Time magazine, republished in numerous other papers. And before the Time, it was recorded by the Ukrainian police. This woman actually pressed the charge, and she reported that she was raped by those two Russian soldiers. They killed her husband and continuously raped her while her son was hiding in the other room. So this is a horrendous form of one of the displays of the war of Russia against Ukraine. So we can say that the occupants, they do not have very high moral standards, and this is one of the hundreds of other cases which we probably will learn in the nearest future, because many cities are being deoccupied, and those women who were trapped in their besieged cities will start speaking up now. But so far there was this very big case registered and it went public. But you also need to understand that unfortunately in cases of sexual violence against women, only a very low percentage of them gets reported to the police. Many women are scared, unfortunately ashamed, and feel that they are responsible for it or something of that sort, and they do not really go to report to the law enforcement organs. So we will never know the exact number of sexual violence cases with the view of the war, but I'm sure that there will be more.
So based on this case, shall we say that women are more vulnerable in war? Because women were more vulnerable in all of the cases, I think, in our job market, and not even in a normal society, women are more vulnerable than men. So what about in the special situation of war, a conflict?
Right, like all the human beings, they are affected by the war, right? But they are also becoming the object of additional violence, because for those male soldiers who are indulged into the power given to them by occupying someone else's land, they display this power by sexual violence. Besides other kinds of violence, the end point of this violence is like murder, right? The termination. And there are numerous cases that Russian soldiers, when they are occupying the city, they start killing civilians who are like crossing the street or just lining up to buy the bread, like it happened in Chernihiv. Russian soldiers just shut down 15 people who were lining up to buy bread. Not armed, absolutely safe, normal civilians. There was one American teacher among them. That's a display of power that they feel that they are retrieving from occupying territories. So sexual violence is just another display of this lack of the rule of law in the martial situation in an occupied territory. But besides that, of course, there are some other displays which make women subjected to additional complications, right? Because women normally have to stay in their homes responsible for the children, while men go and risk their lives in other form at the front line by taking arms. So women become unprotected and plus reliable for the children that they have and need to protect. And sometimes, in many cases, right, the child's life is more important for the woman than their own life. So they are under additional risk in this regard. So the war puts women in a critically vulnerable position towards the all the displays of war and unequal distribution of power and coercion in the occupation.
Yes, this is sad. And I've read one article that you were interviewed by a Chinese media, and you said there were you've experienced some stereotypes towards Ukrainian women prior to the war and during this time of war. So can you please recall some of the experience and what are the main focus of these problems?
Right, it's very, unfortunately, it's very typical for Ukrainian women to be subjected to some sorts of, we call it crotch nationalism in feminist terms. Like crotch nationalism is when there is disproportionate amount of attention towards women of different origin or different ethnic or racial origin, let's say so. So due to some activities of social media celebrities, Ukrainian women have received very high attention in China. I think one influencer somehow got married to a Ukrainian lady and created a lot of footage about it in China. And this story caught a lot of positive sentiment among Chinese people, which I think is good. But over the time, it got transformed into some sort of objectification of Ukrainian women, because I heard on many instances, and I was questioned personally, many Chinese people think that Ukrainian women go to China to get married or somehow to catch male attention. So that Ukrainian women are these promiscuous beings who are seeking male attention, are trying to get married and thus achieve some financial stability in their lives. By all these questions, oh, you are from Ukraine, so there are more women in Ukraine than men. When I'm asked this question, I get asked about the demographic disbalance in Ukraine in every taxi. Every time I go somewhere and taxi driver figures out that I'm Ukrainian, the next question I get asked is, oh, so there are really more women in Ukraine than men. I would say, yes, that's true. We have a demographic disbalance, but it doesn't push women out of the borders. You know, it's people travel abroad for work. That's it. That's the only thing that we have to remember about Ukrainian women or Ukrainian men in China. And the fact that some people, when they work or study abroad, that they meet a partner and get married, doesn't make them seekers of some kind of benefit from marriage abroad. So there is this brewing situation about too many, or maybe just disproportionately objected women in the media who are from Ukraine and who are getting married to Chinese. I must say there is an equal number of Ukrainian men getting married to Chinese women in China. They're just out of attention. I know as many Ukrainian men married to Chinese women as Ukrainian women getting married to Chinese men. So there is this disproportionate enthusiasm about having Ukrainian women in China, which is causing very ridiculous situations. Unfortunately, the positive side is that Ukrainian women are praised for their beauty and for their good character and merits and so on. But on the other side, it causes a lot of masculine aggression, which has been displayed at the very beginning of the war in the social media of China, when the news about this break in war were published. Some men came in and started publishing comments under those news that those Chinese men who are in Ukraine have to take advantage of the women in Ukraine. Or they were hoping that more Ukrainian women would come to China and then they would be able to have benefit from that, in soft terms. And I read some articles about this situation, and there is a new term for this kind of display of attention. It's called crotch nationalism. That's when people of particular country have disproportionate attention towards women from other ethnicity, race, or country. But on the contrary, when the men of that country come and get married to the women of the same nationality as them, those men get extremely disappointed or even enraged that their women of the same country are taken by men of another country. So this happens in China a lot. This happens everywhere a lot. Like every country.
Does it happen in Ukraine as well?
Of course, it happens everywhere. Ukraine is not isolated from the entire world as well, and our people travel, and some people actually have very limited worldview. This is what causes them to think like this, to think through the perspective of their crotch, rather through the perspective of some global intercultural dialogue. So I keep reminding people that Ukrainian women, disregarding how beautiful they are all doing their business in China, right? They're doing their business in Ukraine, in China, in America, in other parts of the world, study, work, and marriage and financial benefits from sexual relationships are not the ultimate goal of their business here or there. There is no right for anyone to objectify women in this way or judge women for this kind of thinking. So just please remember that we're all humans. Many women are in extremely difficult condition because of the war right now. And this is not the time. There is no good time for this kind of judgment over women of any nationality, including Ukraine, of course.
Sure, for sure. Thank you very much for sharing your opinions. Because of the time limit, I will have one last question for you, because we just mentioned that most of the refugees out of Ukraine now are female and children, and I saw some reports saying that there are more risks of women. There is more risks of women are forced into sex industry or other kind of industry when they are displaced, when these Ukrainian women are displaced. And on the other hand, there is a very negative term of Ukrainian woman, I think not only in Chinese media, but also in other languages, especially in English or other or different kind of news coverage. So what do you think of these judgments, and do you have any idea of the real situation? Are the displaced Ukrainian women are more risky into those industry at this moment?
I know that from the very beginning of the war, there were reports in media that Ukrainian women were subjected to some attempts to engage them in sexual industry or even to involve them in human trafficking as they fled the country and ended up in the countries of the European Union. And those reports were obviously public only because those women managed to escape this fate. So I believe I will not mention statistics because it is not available yet, or I don't have a hold of it. But because of the distress, because of the limited language abilities, because of financial issues, some women were kind of fooled and tried to be engaged and were trying to be taken into human trafficking for the sexual or any other kind of labor. So there were these cases reported by the media. For example, a woman is met at the railway station somewhere in a European country by a man who says he's from the volunteer organization and he's going to host her. And then we don't know what happens next. So just because many things, in many instances, people rely on those volunteers and just on human support, it's easy to get misled in those situations. So there are numerous mentions, and there is a lot of information circulating in the in those volunteer centers for women to be more cautious and to double check all the information they receive about work, about their hosts, especially if those are male hosts, but sometimes even if those are female hosts in the countries where they seek refuge, they always need to be extremely cautious because there is additional risk for them to end up in sexual slavery, for instance, or any other kind of slavery.
Thank you, Lydia.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Just finish what you want to say.
Yeah, I think I answered.
Okay. So, okay, thank you, Lydia, for sharing this important notice and knowledge of this, what you're gonna be concerned about when you in a difficult situation. Okay, thank you again, Lydia, for your sharing. Now we're going to move to Katrina, and we will leave the Q&A session after Katrina finished her speech. Is that okay?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your invitation. I'm a little stressed by maybe language barrier, and I hope maybe Lydia can help me if I have a trouble. My name is Katerina Primak. I agree, of course, with the speakers. Women are extremely vulnerable in war. However, my organization, Women's Veterans Movement, acts during the war to protect other vulnerable women, and we try to develop women's leadership, of course, and answer to all crisis moments which we stand now, with which we stand now. So I'm staying in Kiev. It's the capital of Ukraine. Some districts of Kiev are under fire. Infrastructure is damaged by Russian troops near Kiev. It's Kiev suburbs which destroyed these towns and a village where people lived and work in Kiev. Also, when I work on TV channel, I have a shooting pavilion in Hostomel. Now it's destroyed, and these cities are not for living now, not for people, but a lot of civilians stay in these cities, towns, and humanitarian corridors are fakes because Russian troops are guaranteed at first they guaranteed safety corridors, but then they are shooting this, and people didn't believe and prefer to stay at their homes and hide from bombs. And it's really a very scared situation, because we have a lot of informational chats in different messages and social medias, where we can read about all horrors, all horribles with civilians here, also about women. For example, few days ago, there was message about Irpin, it's near Kiev, that they hear women screaming, and we know about a lot of raping women, and also it can be near their children. It's very difficult even to say that. And today, yes, I read also very horrible stories about girl which can leave Mariupol, yes, and how they stay in here. Her parents died. Her small brother can leave Mariupol with her, but they now haven't parents. They and you need to know that Russian do war crimes in Ukraine, because many, for example, they shoot different hospitals, maternity hospitals, for example, schools, and it's not only infrastructure and strategic military points. Of course, the civilians is under fire. Since February 25, yes, we have reformatted our work of our organization, Ukrainian Women Veterans Movement, to provide humanitarian assistance to civilians. Before, we work like organization which help female veterans to return to a peaceful life. But before, we do a lot of activities, advocacy campaigns to change the law in Ukraine and to strengthen women's rights in army. Now I
Katrina.
Yes.
Katrina, yes, you just mentioned your organization. I'm going to give you give our audience a brief introduction of your organization. Because Katrina, yes, Katrina is the. I'm sorry.
Okay, about my organization, more detailed. Our organization is community of female veterans, and we unify to fight for our rights in Ukrainian army, because since 2014, women joined forces at the start of the war with Russia. Yes, in 2014, many women had joined the armed forces as volunteers, even though it was not legally recognized. And now women constitute around 15% in the armed forces of Ukraine, and yet their contribution often remains invisible and overlooked. And we, with Patronic of UN Women from 2014, like grassroots organization, community of female veterans, started to advocate our rights. And the first way which we done, it's opened 63 combat positions for women soldiers, because, for example, she was like a stormtrooper in fact, but in her documents she was seamstress. and it's really unfair in many points, and started with material supplying for women. Yes, there are no boots and uniform women's sizes, for example. Yes, and ends by combating of sexual violence in army. So we try to work in all of these issues of women, which was served or serving now, or she have combat status and different issues with her health and needs rehabilitation like veterans. So all of issues with females in defenders sector, it's all all is our questions. But now there are lots of women which was in Ukrainian women veterans movement, they can come back to forces, because now all of our country mobilized to protect, to defend ourselves. Yes. What I need to say to you, I don't know.
Yes.
So maybe you can ask some questions, because maybe
you just bring out the problem, you just bring out the issue about gender inequality in ranks of Ukraine army. So for your, based on your personal experience, when did you feel that it is not equal for female and male to join the army and to serve the country? Because I don't know the situation in Ukraine. Because I think in China, people have equal pay and equal rights in the army, and they are equal respect in our society.
We have different institutionals, yes, and the situation with women are different. For example, in police, there are a lot of women, and gender politics in police. In police, yes, it's more developed because women joined the police earlier in much more units, like yes, but in army there are women can serve, could serve, but they was financial, do financial work, different documentary work, but not in combat position. But now we have glass sail, yes, in sailing, in professions in army, but now I want to protect our government and our forces, because they can do dialogue with us, they can hear us, they involved us to work with women needs and do analysis with our support, yes, because we know better what really women in army need. But for example,
so what are the needs? What are the needs you mentioned? The special needs for women.
Special needs, it's in material supplying, special needs in medicine supplying, because gynecologists were absent in list of medicine personnel, yes, in army. But there are a lot of women, and they have their health issues with which very different with men. And for example, we work on different stages, like in informational area, to change the people thoughts about women who served, because there are a lot of gender stereotypes inside our society, like about if women serve, yes, she could be a bad mother, for example, but it's not true. But we know about cases when women serve and her child learn in school and have bullying cases, because some children can repeat after their parents that it's a bad mother, because mother need to be near her child, and can even think about her military career, because it's dangerous. But it's really dangerous to be neighbor with Russia. It's really dangerous, because they try to destroy my country, and they want to kill these women's children, so they haven't choice and need to go to army forces and protect their child, because the Russian army is really huge, and now gender issues, it's not priority, because we need to protect our rights to live and to be alive, yes. And now women like other men, they join to forces, to territory defense, to other institution and volunteer organization, which have a goal, yes, to save our country now. But it's and now we have a lot of just a second.
Кажи, я можу перекласти.
Як типу upgrades, we have a lot of upgrades in gender agenda in forces, but now you need to understand, with invasion our institutional capacity is very low, so gender questions, it's really it's very difficult to check all of как будет типу, ми не можемо чекнути всі повідомлення про там зґвалтування, статистичні якісь про жінок дані, також важко доступні, тому що інституційна спроможність типу впала.
Зараз. So Katerina says that it is very difficult to check all the aspects of public safety of women, like sexual violence and so on, and gender equality, because we are in the situation of the military aggression and open armed conflict, and apparently lives of people matter a little bit more at this point. Yeah.
And the last one about women serving in war, the worst for every woman is to be captured, because all of them know that you will be under torture, raped, and others. So I know few minutes ago, yes, I read a new about that captured 15 captured women, service women now free, and so maybe few days later, we can have more information about how our enemies, what they do with our women in capture, for example.
So, so you just talk about the general situation of the women soldiers in the ranks before and in current times. So, can you please tell us more about your personal experience? You switched your career from contemporary art into paramedics in 2014, as far as I understand from your profile. So why did you decide to do that? And I wonder what was the situation of Ukraine in general, that were women widely accepted to join the army before 2014? Was that a special year for you, for Ukrainian people?
Of course, it was special. Yeah, we all of years are special now. From 2014, yes, previous we have Revolution of Dignity, in which we very unify like nation, and after that, Russia attacked Ukraine in Donbass, yes, and occupied Crimea also. And so I feel responsible. I felt responsibility for my country and the people who live here. And I was young, I was 21 old, and very excited about idea of our independence, but I excited and believe in this nowadays too, and I feel now with the Russian invasion, big invasion, which started 24th of February, more people have felt the same way that we did in 2014. This need to protect independence and our families and our homes. But when it started in Donbass, yes, a lot of my peers and my friends also came defend this land. And we was right with all of our ideas, because we was like quite madness veterans, yes, without rehabilitation, and say every time that Russia our enemies, and we need to be well prepared, because this war became more and more. So but we tried to help women, female veterans to have rehabilitation in as far as possible in a country that has been at war since 2014. It's really difficult to live, to be a veteran in when in your country war is not ended. Because you can't, most of veterans feel guilty that they stay at home, or they stay safe when their sisters and brothers in arms are now yes, defend the country. So and also we stand with other difficulties upon returning to the peaceful life. Yes, we faced with PTSD, and for example, me, like combat paramedic, now I can be so efficient in frontline, because when I saw blood, I felt all of this in my like memory. I feel, smell, I saw different noises, yes, and it's so I try to protect now our organization, our institution, and do supplying and do different management like for our team, yes, because it's also now very important in this war, because really a lot of people defend country, and all of staff, for example, medical kits with good tactical combat medicine, it's very deficit, and it's hard to find this and buy that. So we fundraise, we try to help female veterans who return to their battalions, and they have different needs from I don't know, different hygienic kits or something, because of course when it's all situation, it's so difficult, and so a lot of active combat actions, I'm sorry. So supplying, and for women also, it's not priority, and I can't как будет обвинять?
Blame.
I can't blame our forces, yes, about bad supplying of women, because because you need to understand this very bad situation. So we don't need to ask government something to do. We need to join to them and help them, and to заполнять прогалини, to
fill the gaps.
Yes, to fill the different gaps which government now can't do, and try to work with them to quick our victory.
Yes. Sure, that's very good point. And for Katrina, do you think that is there any other way that other than joining the army that women can help in when conflict happen?
Як ще можуть допомогти жінки? Це було питання.
Секунду. Jane, could you please repeat? I'm afraid I was distracted.
Sure. Do you think that is there any other way to help your country or help to defend your country other than joining the army?
Of course. I think the first, which can all people which didn't want to get weapon to their arms, yes, and didn't want to serve, they need to go to a safe place and be in safe, and it's very helped to us, our army, to know that in this city we have not Ukrainian civilians, and our forces can work to destroy enemy. And don't worry about civilians.
That's right.
Sure. Okay, because of the time limits, we might need to wrap up our conversation. So thank you, Katrina, for sharing the information about your organization and your experience when while advocating for women's rights in the ranks. So I'm sure that women can get more equal status with men throughout the process. So now we are in the Q&A session. We have collected some questions for both Lydia and Katrina. So okay, I think one of the questions that we have already answered. So the other one might be for Lydia, because I see this audience is asking the differences and similarity before Chinese and Ukrainian women. So based on your experience, what kind of similarities and differences you believe are among Chinese? Sorry. What do you think of the similarity and differences between Ukrainian and Chinese women, and in terms of the characters and status?
Yeah,
Okay.
good question. I think partially it was answered by you, Jane. So Ukrainian women, just like Chinese women, we believe in equal rights. And I'm really glad that Chinese army provides equal rights for male and female servants. We are working to establish that attitude as well. I think right now, both Ukrainian women and Ukrainian men are fighting in the front line and work in the rear, and there is really no time for the gender equality sentiment at this point. We are just working towards the victory. But in general, we have a lot of self-respect. Yeah, and we are working to establish equal society in Ukraine too. I think this is in common with Chinese women. Yeah.
And I also think, also remember that you once mentioned about the self-consciousness about Ukrainian women throughout the years. Is it the same? Is it part of the woman waking up movement in globally?
I think as any society is, maturing and growing up, Ukrainian society has also started to understand some disadvantages and flaws of our current societal order, to fix it from inside by the grassroots initiatives and growing into the recognition at the state level. So like equality of women in the army, it started from the grassroots as well. There were just a few veterans who were talking about the problems of women in the army, but later it became evident and supported at the national level, and now it's not such a huge issue anymore because it was recognized and fixed. So I think our society is growing up by a lot, and now this entire month has pushed us 100 years forward in our maturity and development of our society. I think we understood a lot about what kind of nation we are and what are the problems that we are going to work on after the victory. And some problems have also disappeared and will never become problems anymore, like the problem of language, for example. Now I think we understand that the language question in Ukraine has never been a thing.
Okay, you mean the Ukrainian language and the Russian language? It's never going to be a thing.
I think it's an artificial question used just as a reason to invade Ukraine. There is actually no evidence of any violence against any Russian speaker in Ukraine. So after the war, I don't think there will be any problem with the language anymore.
I see. And what about Katrina? Do you have anything you want to say about the gender equality thing?
About gender equality, no, I think we can solve all our problems. I think that Ukraine, it's really a very feministic, powerful country, because our women ready to unify, because our feminist movements also do a great job, and I think we do very quick developing in after 2014 in our civil society, I think. But if I can answer to two questions which I write read on chat about any ideas on the origins of this war. I really want to ask you and these nice, lovely people which listen us today to more to try to knew more and learn more about Ukraine. It's very great country with rich culture and others. And ideas of origins of this war, it's our historically trap all of time, because we protect our independence since I don't think so, but there was a powerful state in Middle Ages, yes, Kiev Rus, and now so Russia haven't their original history, all many of them stolen about from our history. So origins of this war can understand many post-colonial countries, and it's really about humanistic values now. So because it's really very scary, but Russian try to destroy our museums, our universities. Why is our these buildings under fire? It's not a target on war, really, but they want to destroy us like nation, and you need to understand this, and maybe less watch Russian TVs, because their propaganda is very powerful. Thank you everyone for your attention and your invitation, and I'm sorry for my last speech. I hope you really can interested more about us, because we are a nice nation.
And well, this is
Can I use a moment and build up on that? Yeah. Thank you, Katerina. Yeah, it was a very insightful response. It is unfortunately being forgotten in China quite often that Ukraine is a solid independent state with its own culture for centuries. And just because of the dominance of the Russian news in China, the narrative has shifted that Ukraine is just a sidekick of the Soviet Union. It is absolutely not true. Ukraine as a nation, as a culture, existed far longer than Russia itself. And just the fact of Russia's adoption of the Rus from the Kievan Rus, you need to look into the first part of the name of Kievan Rus, which was founded in Kiev, obviously. So there is a lot of cultural appropriation in the Russian current narrative against Ukraine. So please read books. I can advise a number. There is an amazing book called The Gate of Europe, Our Georgian Man, right? So it was translated. It's a book written by a Ukrainian scholar in Cambridge, I think, and it was translated into Chinese. It's available on JD and on Taobao. You can buy it. It's not expensive, and it gives you a very big insight into the history of Ukraine as a nation, and you will learn a lot about it. So please do not confuse Ukraine with Russia or Soviet Union. We are not the same. Russians do not know our language. Russians do not know our songs, our national music, our national costumes, our house interiors and exteriors look different. So we are totally different nations. And the war conducted on us is not unifying. It's aiming at destroying our national identity, which will never happen. Responding to the question someone raised about the next generation of teenagers, well, they will be extremely pro-Ukrainian and very independent, I think, because they will have very strong memory of the Russian Brotherhood and liberation. Many of them will have lost relatives, homes, and they will remember this war till the last days of their lives. So yes, we will have several generations of very traumatized people, but with very strong memories and very strong beliefs about Ukrainian nation.
Since you, as you just mentioned, the Ukrainian nation and the relationship between Ukraine and Soviet Union and Russia, there is one question I think is related with the previous one, your previous sharing. So how do Ukrainian people see those Ukrainian citizens who participate in the DPR and LPR army? I mean, paramilitary.
Unfortunately, in the Donbass and Luhansk region, Ukraine has lost information backup for the people. So in the last 8 years and several years before that, Russia has built extremely strong narrative among the population and encouraged them to believe that Ukrainians hate Russian-speaking people and so on. By the way, Katerina, which language do you speak in your daily life? Just out of curiosity.
Both, because we bilingual for a newborn, but I prefer Ukrainian after 2014 because it's really important to save our language, like one of national, the most important something. But speak Russian. My parents also speak Russian. We know Russian very well and haven't any aggression before this war to Russians because our hate to this nation now, it's only answering to all war crimes that they do in our land, and it's not and we not first land which was tried to occupied by Russian. We have Georgia, we have our Moldova. And they do aggressive politics all of time to neighborhood states, and it's awful. So it's better that than I hope we win as soon as possible.
Right, so building up on that, Donetsk and Lugansk regions have been dominantly Russian-speaking, and nobody ever had a problem with that, except the Russian propagandists who decided that it's a problem for Ukraine. I was speaking both languages all my life and never was really ridiculed by anyone for my Russian or for my Ukrainian in Ukraine. I was just using both languages to speak respectively with Ukrainian or Russian-speaking people. And I've been all over Ukraine, including Donetsk. And I was speaking Ukrainian in Donetsk, and I was never beating up there, but that was in 2013. Just a few months later, Donetsk decided that Ukrainians are extremely aggressive against them. Well, I think this is the information war that we lost, unfortunately. But I have hopes. I have hopes that people of Donetsk and Lugansk will see that Russians do not really care about them. And we can see that Russians are using the people, the men from, they conscribe, forcefully conscribe men from Donbass into the army and send them with very little self-protection and weapon into the grinder of Russian-Ukrainian war, and they eventually get killed there in the first place because they use them as a shield to kind of protect Russian troops from Ukraine. They put the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic people in between as a man shield. So this is quite inhumane, and I think the people from those two quasi-republics will understand that their lives matter very little for the Russian geopolitical play.
I think both of you had answered the question of Wang. So thank you both for this sharing. And there is a question for Katrina, because you are based in Kiev. So we have heard of we should say, I'm not sure which I should say, it's news or it's a rumor or it's a scandal. Like, have you heard of the massacre in Bucha town, which is 20 kilometers far away from Kiev? And because the person, he doesn't know about the reality and how much the truth of this news. So do you have any idea about this?
Лідія, допоможіть, будь ласка, з питанням про Пущу. Не зрозуміла.
Це питання про Бучу. So the question is about Bucha. It's a city 10-15 kilometers from Kyiv, that's right. It has just been liberated from Russian troops. For more than a month, it had been occupied by Russians. And so I'm not sure where exactly this question is coming from. I'm reading it and I even translated it into English. Because apparently there were some news in Chinese media about this particular city that I'm not aware about. So just to give you general perspective, Hostomel, Bucha, Irpin, and many other cities northwest of Kyiv had been under Russian occupation, and there had been extremely bloody fights between the Ukrainian and Russian army. And those cities were in complete isolation. Nobody could come in. Even the volunteers could not reach Bucha. People were living in the basements for months. And we had just deblocked that city and volunteers were able to enter. And that's true that the bodies of dead people are lying in the streets as they were lying there for a month. One famous Ukrainian journalist was found among the dead. He was killed there on the 13th or something of March, Mark Levin, and he was found dead among those people. There was completely no connection, no electricity, no water in the houses, nothing. So the situation is, it's awful. Many civilian losses because there was no connection. It's really difficult to establish how those people died. Apparently they were either shelled or shot with assault rifles in the streets under different circumstances. So as the police and the respective law enforcement agencies will go into the cities, they will try to establish the clarity what exactly was going on there. Regarding the word massacre, I don't think it relates to Bucha in particular. It relates to Bucha, to Irpin, to Chernihiv, to Sumy, to Kharkiv, to Mariupol. All these cities, they are facing full-fledged massacre. Everywhere Russian troops move in, there is a massacre there. Civilians are just not considered as humans by Russians. They are being shot directly by tanks. I can send you videos. You will be shocked that the Russian tank would just shoot into a civilian walking in the street. Which rules of law apply to this kind of situations? Is this not a massacre itself? So it's a full-fledged massacre around the entire territory of Ukraine, including the cities which are not yet occupied by Russia, but they are being shelled by Russian missiles, ballistic missiles, or from aircrafts.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. I hope your answer, I hope what you just said answered this question for this audience. And there is another question asking that, as I think this is for you both, as young women who had experienced 2014 and this war, and how do you think this continuous war, which I mean what's happening 8 years ago and now, which I'm correct.
To this question. I think I replied to this question. Yeah.
You replied this question?
Yes, I replied to this question. I said that we will have several generations of extremely traumatized people, but they will have very strong national awareness.
Okay. I must have missed this part of answer. And then okay, so one last question is that there is one guy mentioned about surrogacy, and he said that the important way to elevate the woman's status in Ukraine is to prohibit surrogacy. What do you think of this?
Well, it's a very common misunderstanding. If you don't understand something, you want to prohibit it. It's a very wrong thing. First of all, surrogacy has a place to exist in many countries legally. In Ukraine, it is kind of in a gray zone. It's legal, but Ukrainian women who serve as surrogate mothers, they do not get enough legal protection. So I believe this is a problem that we need to talk about. I do not have anything against surrogate motherhood. And since someone is asking, I don't know whether it is who it is in general. I don't see this question. But if Chinese society condemns surrogacy so much, why is China one of the first and largest users of Ukrainian surrogate mother services in this case? So yes, Ukraine has one of the biggest markets of, if we can call it market, unfortunately it is a market of surrogacy services in the world, second largest after the United States. And it's unfortunately, it's so strong because the services are cheaper comparing to American. In America, it costs like $150,000 US, in Ukraine around $40,000 US. The problem is Ukrainian surrogate mothers do not get as much payment as they would have to, given the risks to their health that they encounter being surrogate mothers and going through the pregnancy. But since there is a demand and there is a supply coming out of the consent of a woman to engage in surrogacy, I don't see any problem in existence of such market. I just wish that Ukrainian government would provide stronger support and give better legal and medical protection to the women who serve as surrogate mothers.
Okay, thank you very much for your insights. Is there anything we want to add, Katerina? I think Katerina might be offline.
Probably.
Okay.
There might be internet problems.
Because we have already had our conference for 2 hours. I think it's time to wrap up our conversation. So thank you very much for your, thank you very much, Lydia and Katerina, for sharing your experience, your stories, and your insights in today's conference. We are very grateful, and we really appreciate what you have brought to us. And thank you every audience who came to our conference room today. And thank you very much for bringing those questions. So please follow us on which our account is called Peace Lab. So I really look forward to see every one of you next time in our conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure to answer your questions, and I hope I will be able to answer them in a chat. Will there be a chat for the participants?
There will be a group chat, but we already have a group chat, so we'll invite them in later.
Okay.
after this event.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Sure.
Thank
If
you.
you, okay, thank you very much. So let's wrap up this conversation.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.